Benfica is the most decorated club in Portugal, the institution that shaped Portuguese football in the eyes of the world. But no giant is safe from falling, and for decades Benfica lived on the edge, between internal crises, power struggles, bad decisions, endless managerial changes, and a northern rival turning the country into a blue-painted kingdom. The biggest club in Portugal lost its throne. The 90s and early 2000s were chaos, zero stability, poor results, debt piling up, confusion behind the scenes, and a growing sense that Benfica no longer controlled the game, not on the pitch, not in the boardroom. But the story doesn't end with a fall, because an empire can sleep, but it never truly dies. In the 2010s, Benfica was reborn. They reclaimed their throne and became once again the center of Portuguese football with titles, dominance, entertainment, championship reigns and record sales to prove their worth. But how could that possibly happen? I mean, Porto seemed destined for eternal dominance with several wins both domestically and in Europe, so how could Benfica achieve this? Well, let me give you some context. As many of you already know, and if you don't, you should, Benfica was one of the best teams in the world in the 50s, 60s, and even in the 70s. Eusébio was the face of that era, but even before the Black Panther, Benfica had icons like José Águas and Mário Coluna. And even after Eusébio left, players like Nené, Humberto Coelho, and Chalana carried the torch. It's hard to point to one single reason behind Benfica's loss of dominance. Honestly, I could make a whole video about it, but since today's focus is on their rebirth, let's just highlight a few key moments that slowly chipped away at the club. First, the departure of Bela Koutman. After researching his story and the so-called curse, I've come to the conclusion that it's most likely fiction. What's undeniable is that the Hungarian coach was the architect of Benfica's 2 European Cup triumphs, and his exit marked the start of a long drought on the continental stage. He was a key piece the club should have kept, but unlike the legend says, he didn't leave because of money, he left because he never stayed more than 2 years at any club. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Benfica expanded their stadium, adding the 3rd tier and raising capacity to 120,000. And while that created a mythical atmosphere for some matches, the reality was harsh. Most games drew 30 to 40,000 fans, leaving the ground half empty, far from the inferno it was meant to be. Financial problems were already visible, but when Manuel Damasio became president, Benfica entered a full-blown identity crisis. Then came Artur Jorge, a Porto legend who had won everything in blue, but his arrival in Lisbon led to a disastrous locker room overhaul that weakened the team even more. After that, Vale Azevedo was elected president. And, I mean, do I really need to talk about this guy? No titles won during his presidency, and he literally robbed the club. And finally, Manuel Vilarinho's mistake of sacking José Mourinho 2 years before he would win 2 European trophies with Porto, widening the gap between the two rivals even further. So, how did Benfica manage to bounce back? Because between 1995 and 2009, they only won 1 league title. While Porto were national champions 5 times in a row, won the UEFA Cup, the Champions League, and built a financial empire through smart transfers. Well, enter Luís Filipe Vieira. Businessman, former president of Alverca and Benfica's football director since 2001. He first joined under Vilarinho, but 2 years later he took full control, winning the presidency with a whopping record of 87% of the vote. Success didn't take long. Against a Porto side that had just conquered Europe, Benfica lifted the Portuguese Cup. And the following year, they won the league for the first time in 10 years. It was the kind of title that felt bigger than it looked on paper, because that Benfica side wasn't even that good. They struggled all year and only grabbed first place near the end. Still, for a fan base desperate for glory, it was emotional. But it didn't last. Porto bounced back immediately, proving 2004-05 was just a hangover after the Mourinho era and dominated the rest of the decade. Benfica, meanwhile, kept cycling through coaches like changing shirts, no stability, no identity whatsoever. It wasn't even about poor squads. I mean, Benfica in the 2000s had names like Mikoli, Simon Sabrosa, Reis, Aimar, but they lacked a real leader to glue everything together. Then, in 2009, they finally found that man in Jorge Jesus. A man with years of experience but always at mid-level clubs. He had impressed at Belenenses and made history at Braga by reaching a European final. Now he was stepping onto the biggest stage of his life, his one chance to cement his legacy. And he took it. With the tactical organization Benfica hadn't seen in years, Jesus led them to the 2009-10 league title, the first in 4 seasons. He unlocked the full potential of David Luiz, Fábio Coentrão, Di Maria and Ramirez, but like in 2005, success came with an expiration date. Jesus was already arrogant before arriving at Benfica, but after that title, his ego exploded. He made impulsive decisions, replaced the reliable king with Roberto, sold David Luiz mid-season, failed to replace Di Maria and Ramirez, and against a Porto side fueled by revenge and led by a young Villas Boas, Benfica stood no chance. Still, the years that followed saw a fierce rivalry reborn. For the first time since the 90s, Benfica and Porto were going toe-to-toe, but mentally, Benfica always cracked first. They'd start strong, then crumble at the decisive moments, and then came May 11, 2013. All Benfica needed was a draw. And they had it, until the last minute. A loose ball. Lietzen flicks it and Kelvin, just a kid from the reserves, fires it so close to the post and it goes in. The title was gone. Jesus on his knees crying at the Dragão. That was his breaking point. In 2013-14 something changed. From outside looking in, Jesus still had the ego, but now he had something to prove and he no longer had the confidence that his ideas would work no matter what. Benfica were dominant. They took advantage of their rivals' rebuilding phase and reclaimed the title. And maybe the most emotional part of that season was the death of Eusébio. The Benfica legend passed away a week before the Clásico against Porto and the team responded with heart, winning and never looking back. The next year, 2014-15, would be even tougher. Oblak, Markovic and Enzo Perez all left while Porto splashed millions on big-name signings. But ironically, it was the free transfers who carried Benfica. Jonas and Júlio César. 2 Brazilians people thought came to Portugal for an easy ride, but Jonas delivered 31 goals and Júlio César saved them time and time again. And when the crucial match against Porto arrived, Benfica kept their cool and held the draw they needed. The back-to-back championship was finally theirs. And that was more than just a title. It was a turning point that restored Benfica's winning mentality. After years of reacting, Benfica were now the ones dictating fear. You could feel it in how they played, how they spoke, how they carried themselves. The balance of power in Portuguese football shifted. Jesus had written his name into history, but the cracks were already showing. Because, you see, success brought ego, ego brought fire, and the relationship between him and the board completely fell apart. Vieira wanted stability, while Jesus wanted control. And in the summer of 2015, the man who led Benfica's rebirth crossed the street to join Sporting. It was by all means one of the biggest betrayals in Portuguese football. But Benfica didn't panic. Vieira knew that true dominance only lasts when the club proves it's bigger than any man. Enter Rui Vitoria. A calm, pragmatic coach, more manager than visionary. He didn't promise revolutions, he promised continuity. And ironically, that was exactly what Benfica needed. With Jonas at his peak, Gaetan inspired, and the young Renato Sanches exploding onto the scene, Vitoria took a team in transition and made a winning machine. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows from the beginning, because the 2015-16 season started with chaos. Benfica were humiliated by Sporting in both the Super Cup and the league, but by January something shifted. Renato brought raw energy, Lindelof stabilized the defense, and average players like Eliseu and André Almeida became consistent. Up front, Jonas and Mitroglou couldn't stop scoring as if they were trying to outdo one another. They stormed through the league and finally took revenge against Sporting, not by playing beautiful football, but by being cold, cynical and efficient. From that moment on, they didn't drop a single point. The 3 was theirs, something even Jorge Jesus never achieved. Benfica was a fortress again. On the pitch, they dominated. Off it, the Seixal Academy became a gold mine. Renato Sanches, Gonçalo Guedes, Nelson Semedo, Lindelof. they brought trophies and millions. The club that nearly collapsed in the 90s was now Portugal's model of success. And then came 2016-17, the absolute peak. The final chapter of an era built from pain and crowned in dominance. Jonas, Jimenez, Mitroglou, Pizzi, Ederson, Eliseu, cold, confident, ruthless. The Tetra was the ultimate statement. Benfica were back at the top of Portuguese football. The Estádio da Luz wasn't a concrete shell anymore, it was a real inferno. But like every empire, the cracks came from within. The Tetra gave the club a false sense of security. They sold key players, believing their dominance would hold, but the replacements simply weren't at the same level. From Ederson to Bruno Varela, from Lindelof to an aging Luizão and Jardel, from Mitroglou to Seferovic. It was a downgrade across the board. The European humiliation that followed drained morale, and Porto, united and hungry again under Sérgio Conceição, snatched the throne back. 2018 and 2019 exposed the divided Benfica. Internal chaos, legal troubles, pressure mounting on Vieira, the image of stability was fading away. Bruno Lage's title in 2019, powered by João Félix's explosion, felt like a last gasp rather than a new beginning. The ideas were spent, the locker room was fractured, one legend after the other began departing, and the aura of inevitability was gone. The dominance that began with Jesus and peaked under Rui Vitoria didn't end in scandal or collapse, it simply faded, slowly like a castle crumbling in silence. And maybe that's why that period from 2013 to 2019 still feels so powerful, because it was the last time Benfica were undisputed kings of Portuguese football. Benfica fell, then rose, then fell again. But a giant cycle never truly ends. Empires don't die, they wait for the next generation to rise again. And if the 2010s proved anything, it's that Benfica can lose time, they can lose trophies, but they never lose what defines them. The ability to rebuild, to reinvent, and to rise back to the top. Now, that rebirth won't happen if fans mistake nostalgia for progress. I get the fear of change, I really do. But sometimes, holding on too tight to the past is exactly what stops you from growing again. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch more recaps of all Portuguese football stories, then subscribe to Throne FC. As always, thank you for watching to the end, I appreciate your support, and I will see you in the next one.